Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. So, welcome to our presentation when a botnet cries, detecting botnet infection chains. We are very pleased to be here today and share with you our detection engineering work. My name is Erwan, and this is Guillaume. We are both working at Sequoia.io in the threat and detection research team. Overall, our team's daily mission is detecting and tracking attackers through infrastructure and malware. Yet in this presentation, we will focus on detection engineering mainly. So this is our agenda for the next 25 minutes. We will start with some context around the botnet we chose to study and their infection chains. Then we will move on to the interest of sigma correlation rules with some rules examples, and to conclude, how do we do detection and threat intelligence at scale? So first, why focusing on botnet infection chains and which botnets, which infection chains? So when we started this research by the end of 2022, the first choice of botnet using some interesting infection chain was Qakbot. Qakbot, you probably know, also known as Qakbot, was initially a banking Trojan since 2008. And as you probably all know, and this is on the screen, there was last August a takedown operation, which has a major impact on Qakbot botnet. And Qakbot is very interesting because it was initially a banking Trojan, which evolved into a more modular malware. And it was very popular among initial access brokers. But the impact was not really known, its impact on victims. And the operation gave us the number of computers infected, which was 700,000, so quite impressive. We had before other information, like from Prodaft, with 1 million victims over a 1 year period. But this takedown will give us a lot this interesting information. The second one was IcedID, which is quite similar to Qakbot, also a banking Trojan, observed into the rise since 2017. And as I just said for Qakbot, it was also used to gain initial access by many threat actors. And on the figure on the slide, on the left, I've listed some of them. And they use IcedID as a first step to load another payload, like BumbleBee, Emotep, that was used as a loader to download the final payload. So most of the time, Cobra Strike, or ransomware, or any other rat. It is a little less spread than Qakbot, but used by the same kind of attackers. Since our first presentation earlier this year, we've studied other malware, such as BumbleBee or Sockgolish, and they are using the same kind of TTPs. And beside their features similarity and their popularity among threat actors, there's also something in common between this malware, and Guillaume will explain that.
Hi, everyone. So there are infection chains in common, and this is the main topic of this presentation. So in the slide, it's like, welcome to the jungle, because there's many different infection chains. And as you can see, it's hard to look at. But we want to detect most of the infection chains, and how can we do that? And we were looking at these graph trees, and we're wondering, can we detect the most obvious thing that comes to mind when looking at it, the DLL block at the end of each infection chain? It seems to always end with DLLs being executed or loaded in different ways. And we tried to perform that, but we had some troubles mainly with classic logs and classic solutions, and without a high false positive rate, it was hard to really detect the full TTP, fully cover the DLL execution and DLL loading. So we tried to change our focus, and we're like, how can we detect infection chains by not focusing on this DLL? And so we started looking at the root infection chains that are colored blocks in the slide. You can see like the red blocks are ISO LNK infection chain type. In green, there's also like HTML smuggling type. And so we were like, it's a good thing to focus on maybe, and let's get a deep dive into it. And we transpose these infection chains into a timeline to see if it was worth putting detection efforts on these infection chains. So it looks like this. In the timeline, it's starting early 2022 and stops today. We kind of focused on the main used ones, and we were kind of wondering if it was worth efforts, and it shows it does, because even if old infection chains tend to evolve, they stay, but new ones emerge and old ones still stay. So you can see some of them stops, like macros and one-node files. That's because Microsoft did some good actions to stop this. But ISO LNK is still there since several years. The same thing for HTML smuggling, etc. So it was good putting detection effort on them. And this is why we wanted to talk about that in this presentation. And this is why we use sigma correlation rules to try detecting these infection chains. So how can we actually enhance our detection? First, we wanted to talk about our environment. So at Sequoia.io, we ingest logs from different sources, from mainly European companies, but with facilities all over the world. And we ingest over 2 billion events per day. So that's quite a lot in the end. And that's mainly a number to give you an idea of the rules we'll talk about in terms of false positive rates or not later on. So you can have rough numbers and adapt them to your environment. Our main challenge is to normalize the logs between the different solutions, because as an XDR, it's kind of the main focus. And for that normalization part, we use ECS, the Elastic Common Schema. And so when we will talk about sigma rules and sigma correlation rules, it will actually be slightly different than the ones you're used to, because we just use the ECS fields, but the logic remains the same. And so we wanted to give you a quick dummy example of a sigma correlation rule. It's really a simple one, just to give you a look at how it's done. In this simple rule, you have QUser being launched, followed by the dir command, and then it's correlated temporally in a 1 minute time span on the same username, by the same username and on the same host name. And the order true means we want QUser first and then the dir command to actually raise an alert. It's important to notice that there's 3 types of correlation, mainly in the sigma specifications. There's a count event type, the count value type, and the temporal proximity, which is the one that is showed on this slide. So it's quite a dummy example to really show you what a simple correlation rule looks like, but we'll go a bit deeper on how to use them. And we will show you we can actually chain correlation rules together to perform a bigger detection. And Erwan will talk to you about that to detect infection chains that we showed earlier.
Yes, and we'll start with the ISO-LNK infection chain. So on the screen there, on the top part of the screen, you have a timeline of events from the bottom to the top. So the first event is an ISO file open from a RAR archive, and then the user opened the ISO file and it spawned a wscript.exe process. And the bottom part, you see that this is the fact that the user opened the ISO file from File Explorer that will produce this kind of process relationship between parent process and child process, between Explorer and wscript.exe. And then the final payload from the ISO file. And as you can see, an alert has been created from these events. So let's see which rule triggered this alert. So this is the rule for the ISO-LNK. So not the real rule, because the real rule is quite long to display on a screen. So we just use a graphic to explain it. So it's a kind of simple correlation rule using, as explained by Guillaume, temporal proximity. So it is composed of two simple sigma rules. The first one with the green background is a sigma rule to detect image file creation. So we are looking for a file name ending by .iso, .xz, .img, etc. Then we want to detect in the second sigma rule with the blue background some suspicious processes, child processes from Explorer.exe. So here we have a list of more than 60 processes. And we want to have these two sigma rules in the same order. So the first one followed by the second one within 5 minutes on the same computer and by the same user. So while focusing on Explorer.exe and child processes, because as I just explained before, the user will open the file received, so here an ISO file, from the File Explorer. So we had to have a list of child processes, even if it's not very efficient, and it could be bypassable by some attackers, because they just need to find a new process to use. But it's kind of always the same usual balance between rule quality and versus false positive. So this was the ISO-LNK, and it works quite well. So now let's move on to the other root infection chain, the HTML smuggling one. And first, to explain a bit what it is HTML smuggling, we'll show you a video from a sample from Qakbot from last February using HTML smuggling. So the user received an email with an attachment file, which is an HTML file. And the email says you just to open the HTML file. So when you open the HTML file, it will download a zip file, a zip archive. And as you can see, the HTML file is just a kind of fake error message with a password. And the zip file is password protected. So the user has to enter the password to open the zip archive. From the zip archive, there is an ISO file. The user double-click on the ISO file. There is a LNK file. And then the Windows command loads the DLL, the Qakbot DLL. So as you can observe on the video, it's quite, there are several steps. And this is exactly these steps we want to detect with our HTML smuggling rule. So we are not focusing on the final payload, as explained by Guillaume, but really on the root infection chain with the user steps. So these are the events from the video. Again, from the bottom to the top, we can see the opening of the HTML file from Firefox, the file creation of a zip file, then several Windows commands, and the alert is created. And here is the graphic explaining the rule. So the rule is a bit more complex. So as explained by Guillaume again, we can do with sigma-correlation, we can combine sigma-correlation within sigma-correlation. And so this is exactly what we do. The global rule is a sigma-correlation temporal proximity. And within it, we have two sigma-correlation rules, another sigma-correlation proximal temporality, and the second one is a count value sigma-correlation. So the first one in blue is composed of three sigma rules. The first one is the detection of the HTML file creation. The second one is the opening of this HTML file by a web browser process locally only. And the third one is the suspicious file creation, again with a list of extension we want to monitor. And we want these three sigma rules in order within 5 minutes on the same hostname and the same username. The second correlation rule in the green background will just detect suspicious processes. So commonly lol beans on Windows. And we will count a unique value of command lines, and we want more than 3 of them. Again, within 2 minutes on the same hostname and the same username. And doing that, we can successfully detect the attack. So combining the two correlation rules together, again on the time period of 2 minutes on the same machine. And the rule is working quite well with a quite low false positive. The false positive are mainly software installation or very specific custom software or administrative operations. So let's sum up a little bit the pros and cons. Here on a radar with some constraints. We've added a third rule I didn't explain. It's the HTR correlation rule, because the HTR file extension is quite used also nowadays. And it's quite similar to the ISO LNK rule, just using the HTR extension. So the first constraint we want to check is the data source we use. So we are using several ECS fields for this rule, and they are quite common. So the value is quite good. We are very low on the radar because we are using process name, process parent, process child relation. We are using file name as well. So it's quite common in many logs available on a host. The second criteria we want to check is the time and skill required to build a rule. So the first, the two simple rules, the HTR and the ISO LNK, are quite simple to build because we just want to detect a certain type of extension, then some processes. But the HTML smuggling one is a bit more complex and requires a lot of time of testing to adjust and avoid some false positive. And in terms of false positive, it's quite easy to filter. It's very specific to customer environment. And to give you some example in our telemetry, for the ISO LNK, it's a bit less than around 40 alerts a month to review. And for the HTML smuggling, it's around 10 alerts per month to review. The specificity of the rule, we have mentioned and explained before, we are focusing on the root infection chain. So we are not so much specific. And the rule was tested initially against Qakbot and IcedID samples, but we were successfully able to detect other malware using the same rule. So it's quite generic for us. In terms of maintenance, the rule maintenance we have to handle is mainly to add new file extension or new process name. Because obviously you want to maintain your rule as much as possible and keep it operational. So overall, we've presented two effective and stable over time detection rules, but however, that's clearly not enough. So how could we improve that? We didn't talk about network detection. So let's explain that and conclude this presentation with Guillaume.
Yeah, so we wanted to give you a talk that covers both system point of view detection, but also a bit of network detection. But we won't be talking about network rules, as we can say, like Snowden, Suricata and all, but mostly how we use threat intelligence at scale along with detection to have a good coverage on the different threats. One of these things that we have internally is called C2 trackers. It's basically having heuristics to follow malware infrastructures and to retrieve IOCs of the different C2s and then use them as a detection. So one example here is that for Qakbot, for example, it was easy to follow with a default certificate. This is a screen, I think, on Census search engine. And you can easily see that there's always the same value if you pick several C2s. And with some regexes and all, you can do a good heuristics to find C2s. Of course, you will need many different heuristics to have a better coverage, not just this one. And this is kind of showed on the graph that you can see. It's the number of C2 servers found for Qakbot using our heuristics over the years. I think it's starting early 2022. And you can see that we added some heuristics because it jumps out in the end of 2022. And you can also see that it drastically goes down in the last 2-3 months. We think it's mainly due to the takedown, but maybe we just don't see anything anymore. But yeah, probably due to the takedown. And so this is one good detection to have that's not really costly like network rules that we used to, and can still have great impact on detecting these malwares. So we have heuristics, we have detection rules. How can we integrate the whole thing to improve overall? This is the virtuous circle that we like to show because we use Yara rules first to retrieve malware samples, and then we push the samples into an orchestration tool that performs several modules and actions on the samples to mainly extract configuration, but also sending them to a sandbox. And the sandbox detonates the sample, then it triggers our detection rules or not, and it gives us C2s that we have or not. And then this is the main thing that we wanted to show, is that sometimes we don't have the correct detection rules, sometimes we don't have the C2s, and this is really important to notice that we don't have these things, to improve and then build new detection rules, or at least enhance the existing ones, and also maybe find new heuristics for our trackers to find more, and then we find more samples and more detection rules, etc., etc. So, of course, we try to automate this as much as possible, but as you've seen in the video, sometimes there's passwords with zip files and all. Sometimes it needs some user interactions, and it's hard to fully automate that. But we are trying to. But there's still some manual steps right now that takes lots of time. In the end, we wanted to conclude with the classic pyramid of pain, but applied to infection chains, and conclude the presentation by saying that attackers are not dumb. As you all know, there's no such thing as a magic rule. And this is why, while so much work is needed to build efficient detection rules and having ultimately, in the end, zero regression, that's what we want to have, it's not easy to do that. And delivery infrastructure, for example, is like trivial for us to have. It's simple to automate that and track that, but we might miss some of them, and the attacker is really easy for him as well to change that. While, for instance, root infection chains, while challenging for us as defenders, because without correlation capabilities, it's hard to detect this kind of root infection chains, but it's also really challenging for the attacker because it might need to change the whole language of its malware, or maybe just the way he actually infects the victim. And of course, the TTPs is always the best thing to fully have coverage for, but it's really hard to have a full coverage of all the TTPs and all without a high false positive rate, we think. And so, yeah, we wanted to conclude the presentation by saying that we need both detection rules, but also other things like threat intelligence at scale to have a better coverage of the different threats. And that's it. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And just so you know, the correlation rules that Erwan showed you are listed in our GitHub community. You can find them. And we will probably add the HTA correlation rule soon, but it's not there yet. Thank you.